according to mainstream medical doctors, the reason why we're seeing so much type 2 diabetes and obesity and cardiovascular disease is because people are eating tons of red meat, butter, tallow, and saturated fat. Well, it turns out, we're going to look at the data here. Humans are consuming about 44% less red meat compared to years past. We're consuming about 70% less butter than years past. Way less lard, way less tallow. You might be wondering, well, what has changed? We're eating significantly more amount of chicken. Orders 300% more vegetable oils and a lot more corn-derived sweeteners. So there's not really a good temporal association with the shift in the recommended foods and the changes in obesity and non-communicable diseases. That's the basic thesis of this video. Our diets have changed a lot in the last 50, 60 years, but we're actually eating more of what the experts and pundits are telling us to eat, yet we're seeing rampant metabolic disease, rampant obesity, we're seeing autism, we're seeing autoimmunity, sudden cardiac death, cancers now at younger and younger ages. So I would like to just look at historically how our diets have changed. And really, I think this raises more questions than answers about what is healthy eating anyway. Because if we eat what the experts and the consensus panels and so forth over at Stanford, over at Harvard, over at Oxford, all these people are telling us to cut back on butter, red meat, and saturated fat, and have more lean protein like chicken, have more vegetable oils. Well, it seems that that's what we've been doing. In fact, if you look at these trends here, we're going to look at data from this paper titled United States Dietary Trends Between 1800, Lack of Association Between Saturated Fatty Acid Consumption and Non-Communicable Diseases. You might be saying, well, okay, well, I know what obesity and diabetes and cancer is, but what is a non-communicable disease? A non-communicable disease is a disease that manifests as a result of diet and lifestyle, of having an unhealthy diet and lifestyle. So this is not directly transmitted from person to person, such as COVID, such as the flu, such as smallpox. A non-communicable disease is generally a chronic disease that manifests as a consequence of living an unhealthy life and eating unhealthy foods. So what was unique about this paper is the investigators created amazing images. We have shifted away from animal fats because if you remember the late 1800s, the early 1900s, most people were eating butter, tallow, or lard. In terms of their primary cooking fat, the primary fat in their diet was mostly from animals because we didn't have canola, sunflower, safflower, corn, soy oil. That was a manifestation of the Industrial Revolution and all these major companies getting into the business of selling food-like products. And as a function of that, we have declined or decreased our consumption of animal fats, right? Why have lard when you can just go buy Crisco, right? Hydrogenated cottonseed oil. That makes so much sense, doesn't it? Well, as you can see here, we have increased our per capita consumption of all kinds of plant-based fats. Now, curiously, this is exactly what the American Heart Association and all the pundits that create our dietary guidelines for America, they're recommending this, more polyunsaturated vegetable fat. Well, guess what? We're doing that. And what do we see when we go out in public? I don't care about the random, all the epidemiological studies, the nurses' health studies, the health professional follow-up studies, all these different studies, the meta-analysis show that people that consume more polyunsaturated vegetable fats have lower LDL cholesterol and all these things. But all we have to do is go out in public and see what people are eating. Go to Safeway, go to Costco. See the rampant obesity. Look in people's grocery carts. We can see with our own eyes the people that are consuming large amounts of vegetable oils and processed foods that contain the very vegetable oils, they are the most unhealthy in our society. So I think it's time that we sort of reflect and look back and see, well, where did we go wrong here? Because, a lot of folks want us to believe that it's the red meat that's causing the atherosclerosis. It's the red meat that's causing heart disease and so forth. Well, we're actually consuming way less red meat, about 44% less red meat. And the intake of chicken has dramatically increased, as you can see from Figure B from this paper that was titled Trends in Processed Meat, Unprocessed Red Meat, Poultry, and Fish Consumption in the U.S. between 1999 and 2016. In conclusion, the investigators say, despite growing public health concerns about processed meat consumption, there have been no changes in the amount of processed meat consumed by U.S. adults over the past 18 years. Okay, I know this data is about 8 years old, but still, people are not just eating way more hot dogs than they ever have. They're eating way more Doritos, Fritos, bagels, Pop-Tarts, cereals, French fries, and other processed foods that contain the very polyunsaturated fats that the American Heart Association is suggesting that you eat more of. Yet, why are we seeing rampant obesity, especially in children and beyond? They conclude, findings of the study can inform public health policy priorities for improving diet and reducing chronic disease burden in the US. So before we go back to all these images that I think are very beautiful and really succinctly tell the story to people who are scared of butter, who are scared of red meat, and think that chicken is the best thing ever made, I want to just pause and say, I appreciate you being here. Thank you for sharing these videos with people, because diet advice is so confusing out there. A lot of people just don't know what to eat, right? They're going plant-based, they're going a lot of chicken, they're really confused, right? They think the healthiest thing they can have when they go out to eat is, iceberg lettuce with the dressing, the Thousand Island dressing. Probably, in my opinion, the last thing that I would order when I go out to eat. So we need to help people. And that's why I make these videos, so you can share this with your friends and family. So I appreciate your shares, your comments, your likes. Now, since we're talking about metabolic health, I just want to tell you about a natural product that's been used for 3,000 years in both Ayurvedic as well as traditional Chinese medicine. It's called berberine hydrochloride. There are now 17 well-conducted human clinical trials finding that this natural product called berberine, that's derived from various plant sources out in nature, actually helps support metabolic health. It can help curb cravings, particularly for junk food, because it helps to increase ketones in the body. I've been a huge fan of berberine since 2011 and came up with this formula in 2012 and didn't actually bring it to the market until several years ago, but we've received hundreds of reviews over at myoscience.com from people like you who are trying to elongate their fast, curb evening food cravings for like cookies and ice creams and sweets, and also help support metabolic health. So you can save by going to myoscience.com on the novel Berberine Fasting Accelerator that also features synergistic nutrients like alpha-lipoic acid as well as biotin. So you can see what other people are saying, and if you decide to purchase it, you can use the code podcast to save. I will link that in the description below. So let's go back and focus here on figure A from the paper that I just mentioned that was published in the Eat Right journal. Okay, so we're not eating a lot of red meat, particularly young people. I mean, this is what's interesting is this data was parsed out based upon age groups, between 20 and 34 years of age, between 35 and 49, between 50 and 64. Most people under 50 are eating way more chicken than red meat. Okay. Well, you might be asking then, why are we seeing, I don't know about you, but I've been following research, for a very long time. I got my master's degree in 2007. That's when I started it. I don't remember hearing about early onset cancer in people under 50. I mean, cancer historically, just like type 2 diabetes back in the late 90s, it was called adult onset diabetes. Now children have this. Now young children are getting cancer. Young adults in their prime are getting cancer. Why aren't we looking at the causes of this? And obviously our food has changed a lot. We're eating way more chicken than red meat. Fish consumption has stayed the same. Processed meat hasn't increased. So it's not like people are getting sicker because they're eating all of these hot dogs and sausage and prosciutto, right? They're getting sick because processed food, that is what has increased, as well as industrial seed oils. I think when you look at these images and look at the comparison of the inverse, the flipping of replacing animal fats for vegetable based fats, margarine, we have canola oil, soybean oil, corn oil. Pretty much every processed food you buy at the grocery store has one of these oils in it. Maybe sometimes it's high oleic sunflower oil or high oleic canola oil. These are still processed oils that are likely oxidized and contributing to unhealthy metabolic processes in the body. So we're eating way more. Also shortenings, you can see from this image here, the title of this is Added Fats and Oils Per Capita Between the Years 1909 and 2019. You can see around in the late 90s, vegetable oils just completely skyrocket. Butter, lard, tallow, saturated fat consumption continues to be at all-time lows. Now, if the diet heart hypothesis that Ansel Keys presented and foisted onto the world, that was adopted by the American Heart Association and put into policy by the McGovern report. There's a senator, Mr. McGovern, in the late 1950s that created the dietary guidelines that recommended that we replace saturated fat, butter, tallow, lard, and red meat and have more lean protein and have more plant-based fats because it so-called lowered your LDL cholesterol. But does that lower mortality? Well, I mean, if you look at all-cause mortality, it continues to increase. We look at younger and younger people are having mental health issues, suicidal ideology, or as I mentioned, early onset cancer. adult onset diabetes, that was a term that we ascribed for type 2 diabetes because no children used to have type 2 diabetes. Now this is rampant. I just got an email from my daughter. She's starting in the 7th grade. The medication list, right? Parents now can give all their kids medications at school, insulin and Lord knows what else. And so I don't remember that growing up. Do you remember all these kids taking medications when you were in middle school? I mean, this is almost unheard of. But now many kids are taking all kinds of different medications, antidepressants, ADD medication, anxiety medication, insulin. I mean, the list goes on. This is more common than you might think, which is very scary. And most of these kids, sadly, as we've talked about before, the Journal of the American Medical Association put out an article in the fall of 2021 finding that 58% of the calories that kids eat are from ultra-processed junk food that unequivocally contain these processed vegetable oils, corn, soy, canola, as well as cottonseed. So it's probably not the saturated fat, the butter, the tallow, the red meat. Historically, we're eating less and less of that compared to years past. As I mentioned, meat consumption, red meat in particular, is down 44%, whereas vegetable oil consumption has increased 320%, my friends. So I think it's time that we really refrain the dietary boogeymen and look at what is probably statistically, and I know we have these epidemiological studies that show that people that consume more PUFAs from vegetables are healthier, have lower rates of heart disease and all this. We know that nutritional epidemiology is really an imperfect and inaccurate way to assess the direction of causality about what macronutrient or food group is causing disease or not. I think we need to look with our own eyes at the grocery store. The people that are the most overweight, the most unhealthy, are generally consuming foods that are enriched in soy, canola, corn, and sunflower oil, as well as chicken, right? How many times have you seen someone who's super overweight and unhealthy looking eating just red meat and butter at the store? It's very, very, I never see it. But in contrast, you see the soda, the chips, the baked goods and things like that. And I'm not trying to judge people. They're just eating the foods that they think taste good, and they hear that they're healthy. There's oftentimes a little endorsed by the American Heart Association logo on these foods, so they think it's good, and they don't realize that they're incredibly unhealthy and disease promoting, and they're hard to regulate the consumption of that. And we've talked about that before. So I would love to know what you think in the comment section, my friends. I appreciate you tuning all the way in. Hopefully you got some value from this, and I will update the show notes so that you get access to these articles. I would download these. I would print them out, especially if you're having battles with friends or family or your doctor about what foods are healthy or unhealthy, and just show them the statistics. It's probably not the red meat and the butter that are causing people to be so unhealthy. We're eating way less of that as a collective, and way more corn-derived sugar, way more chicken, and way more vegetable oils. Yet we are among the most unhealthy nations in the country. We spend more on healthcare than any other country, any other developed country in the world, yet our life expectancy is behind Cuba. Okay, it's time we make a difference. It's time we make a change in our diets. So thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you in a future video down the road.